Good morning, Year 3. I hope you're well rested and ready for today's online learning. In this morning's reading comprehension lesson, we are going to analyse a second poem. So the ally for this lesson is to be able to explain the main message or theme in a poem. You do need to have either a pencil, a pen and paper. And you are in control of the pause button. If you need to pause, do so, do what you need to do, and then restart the video. Yesterday we discussed onomatopoeia in the sound collector. So remember what onomatopoeia is? Well, you can see examples of onomatopoeia on the right hand side. So it is a word and it describes a sound, and actually it mimics the sound or copies the sound of the object or action, such as bam, crash, boom, zoom, puff, and so on. On the next slide will be a quiz. So we're going to start the quiz now. So let me begin the quiz on onomatopoeia. Question 1, or number 1, find the examples of onomatopoeia in the following sentence. The crisp leaves crunched underfoot as we ran through the park. Which word in that sentence is an example of onomatopoeia? Is it leaves crunched underfoot or park? Number 2, find the examples of onomatopoeia in the following sentence. She dropped the shoe to the floor with a satisfying thud. Which word in that sentence is an example of onomatopoeia? Is it dropped, floor, satisfying, or thud? Number 3, I'm just going to read the sentence from now. Overnight, the tiny trickle from the leaking pipe had become a gushing waterfall. In that sentence, there are 2 examples of onomatopoeia. Select the 2 words below. Number 4, find examples of onomatopoeia. The lorries continued down the road with a rumble and a roar. Select the 2 words that are examples of onomatopoeia. Look at the words below. Select the words that are examples of onomatopoeia. Number 5, she heard the snip of the scissors and her long treasured hair slithered to the floor. There are 2 examples of onomatopoeia in that sentence. Which are those 2 words? Number 6, hearing the unexpected tinkle of ice in a glass made him suddenly realize he was thirsty. Look at the words below. Which word below is an example of onomatopoeia? Let's go to the next slide. So number 7, the mud squelched as it squished between my toes. There are 2 examples of onomatopoeia in that sentence. Select those 2 words from below. Number 8, slam! All of a sudden the wind whooshed through the house. There are 2 examples of onomatopoeia below. Select those 2 words. Number 9, when she was ill, she thought she could hear murmuring and whispering coming from the room next door. There are 2 examples of onomatopoeia in that sentence. Select those 2 words from below. And the last one, number 10, the balloon burst with a loud pop. Which word below is an example of onomatopoeia? So let's now move on to our poem. And this poem will be read to you. So you need to just sit, relax, and listen.
I know very well what I'd rather be, if I didn't always have to be me. I'd rather be an owl, a downy feathered owl, a winkety blinkety yellow-eyed owl, in a hole in a hollow tree. I'd take my dinner in Chipmunk Town, and wouldn't I gobble the field mice down? If I were a winkety-blinkety owl and didn't always have to be me. I know very well what I'd like to do if I didn't have to do what I do. I'd go and be a woodpecker, a rappity-tappity red-headed woodpecker in the top of a tall old tree. And I'd never take a look at a lesson or a book, and I'd scold like a pirate on the sea if I only had to do what I liked to do and didn't always have to be me. Or I might be a puma, a singe-coloured puma, a slinking, sly-foot puma, as fierce could be. And I'd wait by the water-holes where antelope drink in the cool of the morning, and I do not think that ever any antelope could get away from me.
Now that you've heard the poem, it's time to think about the poem and how much of the poem you actually understand. So let me run over the LI again. To be able to explain the main message or theme in a poem. So as you know, after hearing the poem, a number of different animals are mentioned. Now the author or the poet has chosen to call this poem Rathers. So why is the title of this poem called Rathers? Did you see any clues in the first verse that gives you an idea why this poem is called Rathers? Or did you see or find any clues in verse 2 or 3 which gives you a clue as to why the poem title is called Rathers? Number 2, in this poem, which animals does the poet want to be? And that one is very straightforward. Remember, we've talked about using the text. Look in the text. Some people will just have remembered after listening to the poem which animals were mentioned. So if you can't remember, you need to check in each verse to find out which animals the poet wants to be. And if you've got question 3, write down a phrase the poet uses to describe the owl. Well, if you've listened to the poem and you've read a part of the poem, you realise all of this takes place in verse 1. So verse 1 is about the owl. So you should be able to look at the text or verse 1 and locate the information that you need. Number 4, where would the poet live if she became an owl? Well, owl is a key word in that sentence, and we've already discussed that all the information about the owl will be found in verse 1. So you need to look in verse 1. Number 5, what does a poet not want to be? Well, that's a slightly trickier question. So you'd have to be looking at some part of verse 1 which gives you a clue what the poet does not want to be. Question 6, how would you describe a woodpecker's character? Now once again, woodpecker's a key word in that question, and we know, or you should know by now, that the woodpecker is discussed in verse 2. So you need to look in verse 2 for a description of the woodpecker's character. Number 7, what would the poet not have to do if she was a woodpecker? Once again, woodpecker is the key word, and we know woodpecker information is found in verse 2. So these are really simple skills that you should naturally use to locate information that you need to answer questions. Question 8. Which phrase is repeated in verse 1 and 2? So you'll need to skim through verse 1 and verse 2 and look for a repeated phrase. That's a very basic skill. So look carefully, find the phrase that's repeated. Okay, question number 9. Why does the poet do this? Why do they say that repeated phrase? What's the reason behind the poet repeating that phrase? And that, if you get this answer, it means that you're developing a good understanding of what this poem is about. And let's move on now to verse 3. So, as you can see, verse 3 is based on the puma. And once again, the ally is the same as before, to be able to explain the main message or theme in a poem. So let's have a look at question A. How does the puma move in verse 3? So look for any information in there about how the puma moves. B. Find and copy a phrase that shows the puma is dangerous. So dangerous is the key word. What word or phrase in there tells us that the puma is dangerous? C. What is the poet trying to tell us about the puma? So you have to think outside the box now. The answers aren't directly given to you in verse 3. You have to think about all of the information that you've been given about the puma, and you need to find the answer to this question by summarizing everything you know about the puma. D. Why might the poet want to be a puma? Well, once again, you're not going to find the information all the information that you need in verse 3. You need to think about the information given and then decide on what does the poet like about the puma, or what impresses them about the puma that wants them to be a puma. E. Can you give 3 examples of alliteration used in the poem? Now, alliteration is something that we've covered quite a few times in the autumn term and mentioned it in the early spring term as well. So alliteration, remember, they are words that start with the same letter or sound. They don't necessarily have to be next to each other. They could just be in the same phrase or in the same line of the poem. F. What is the main message of the poem? Find evidence in the poem to back up your answer. So this is a much trickier question. Essentially, you need to understand what is this poem about. So use whatever you know about the poem to help you to find the answer to this, but you also need to find evidence in the poem to back up your answer. Now that one is definitely a bit trickier, but with a bit of investigation you'll be able to find the answer. Okay, so once you're done, remember, if you send it to yr3@grange.harrow.school.uk. Thank you very much for listening and doing the task. I look forward to reading your work when you email it to us. So take care for now, and I'll speak to you very shortly in the writing lesson. The writing lesson is following the same poem. Bye for now.